Some men play football, others become warriors. Norman Hunter was both. For over a decade, he was the heart of Leeds United's defence, a man who didn't just stop opponents, he struck fear into them. "Bites Yer Legs" wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning, a reminder that stepping into Hunter's territory came at a cost. His tackles were bone-crushing, his presence was unforgiving, and his loyalty to Leeds was unshakable. But in the spring of 2020, Hunter faced an enemy no amount of grit, fight, or raw aggression could stop. An unseen force that brought the world to its knees, COVID-19. The man who had spent his life battling on the pitch, who had endured the bruises, the blood, the war of football's most ruthless era, was now fighting his final battle. And this time, there were no stadium lights, no roaring crowds, no teammates at his side, just the cold, sterile silence of a hospital room. Hunter had survived the golden years of English football, lifted a World Cup, and stood among giants. But fate had one last cruel twist. How does a man who built his legacy on resilience, dominance, and unbreakable will fall to something invisible? And what did his passing mean for the game, for Leeds United, and for the world still grappling with an unprecedented crisis? This is the untold story of Norman Hunter, the enforcer, the legend, and the final battle he never saw coming. Football history is filled with warriors like Hunter, and their legacies deserve to be remembered. If you want more untold stories of football's fiercest icons, subscribe now, because history should never be forgotten. Before Norman Hunter became a legend, before the name Bites Yer Legs sent shudders through English football, he was just a boy from County Durham, a place where toughness wasn't a choice, but a necessity. Born in October 1943, Norman entered a world already marked by loss. His father had passed away before he was born, leaving his mother to raise him alone in the industrial heart of England. Life was hard. The streets were rough. But it was there, in those narrow alleys and makeshift pitches, that Hunter's unbreakable spirit began to form. Football wasn't just a game, it was an escape. A ball at his feet gave him purpose, a means to carve out a future beyond the working-class struggles that surrounded him. But even in those early years, he was different. While other kids shied away from a crunching tackle, Norman thrived on them. At school, his coach recognized his talent, but saw a flaw. Hunter relied too much on his left foot. Determined to mold him into a more complete player, the coach forced him to train with his right, drilling him relentlessly. It frustrated Norman at first, but over time it shaped him into a defender who could anticipate, react, and strike, a skill that would serve him well in the brutal battles of English football. By his teenage years, his reputation had spread beyond Durham. Scouts from across the country took notice, but it was Leeds United that made the first move. Playing for Birtley Juniors, Norman was spotted by a Leeds scout who saw not just skill, but something more, a fearlessness, a raw aggression that couldn't be taught. But football wasn't a guaranteed future. His family, wary of the sport's unpredictability, urged him to take up an electrical fitter apprenticeship, a stable career, a safe path. Yet for Norman, there was no decision to make. Leeds United had called. And when football calls, you don't hesitate. At 15 years old, he left home, stepping into a club that was far from the powerhouse it would later become. Leeds wasn't a team of champions. They weren't feared. But Norman Hunter hadn't come to follow a legacy. He had come to build one. What was it about Hunter that made him different? And how did a raw teenager transform into one of the most feared defenders of his generation? When Norman Hunter arrived at Elland Road in 1959, Leeds United was a club without direction. They were far from the dominant force they would become, struggling in the second division, lacking identity, and flirting with mediocrity. But Hunter wasn't here to blend in. He was here to change the club's destiny, and in turn, Leeds United would change him. His first years were spent in the shadows, learning the brutal realities of professional football. The game was faster, harder, and more ruthless than anything he had ever faced. Every day in training was a battle, a test of survival. But Norman didn't just endure it, he thrived in it. Then, in 1961, everything changed. Leeds United made a decision that would alter the club's history forever. Don Revie was appointed as manager, a visionary, a tactician, but above all, a man who understood that football wasn't just about skill. It was about discipline, unity, and a willingness to fight for every inch. Revie saw something in Hunter, a raw enforcer with an instinct for destruction, but also the intelligence to build. It wasn't just about smashing opponents. It was about breaking attacks before they started, reading the game like a strategist. By 1962, the waiting was over. At just 18 years old, Hunter was handed his senior debut, stepping onto the pitch with a cold, calculated presence that belied his age. He partnered with Paul Revie, forming the foundation of what would soon become an unbreakable defence. Then came 1964, the moment that changed Leeds forever. Promotion to the First Division. But it wasn't just about getting there, it was about making a statement. Hunter, alongside Jack Charlton, formed one of the most feared defensive partnerships in English football. Charlton was the organiser, the towering presence. Hunter? He was the executioner, the man who made sure opponents never forgot their time against Leeds. As Leeds grew stronger, so did his reputation. The tackles, bone-crunching. The battles, unforgiving. The nickname, inevitable. Bites your legs. A warning, a promise, an identity. Norman Hunter wasn't just a defender anymore, he was the backbone of Leeds United's rise. But this was only the beginning. The golden era was about to begin, and Hunter would be at the heart of it. Norman Hunter had already earned his place as a Leeds legend, but the years ahead would cement his name among the greatest defenders in English football history. The late 1960s and early 70s were Leeds United's golden age, an era defined by dominance, tactical brilliance, and an unyielding will to win. And at the heart of it all was Hunter, the enforcer, the backbone, the warrior who never backed down. By 1965, Leeds had transformed from a struggling side into a formidable force under Don Revie's meticulous guidance. They came agonisingly close to their first league title, finishing as runners-up in the First Division, a sign of things to come. But it wasn't just about league finishes. This was a team built to fight, outthink and outlast its opponents. Hunter's aggressive, no-nonsense style made him a feared figure on the pitch. Every tackle, every interception, every moment he threw himself into battle reinforced his reputation. But he was more than just an enforcer. His intelligence and positional sense made him a vital cog in Revie's tactical machine. Leeds didn't just play football, they imposed themselves, controlled the tempo, and dismantled the opposition. The turning point came in 1968, when Leeds finally claimed their first major European trophy, the Intercities Fairs Cup. It was a grueling campaign, but Hunter's resilience and leadership played a crucial role. Leeds had conquered Europe for the first time, and the taste of silverware only fueled their hunger. A year later, they finally lifted the First Division title in 1969, a triumph built on consistency, tactical discipline, and an unbreakable defence. Hunter played every single match, 42 games of relentless, unyielding performances. Leeds had arrived, and they weren't just here to compete, they were here to dominate. Success followed success. Another Fairs Cup in 1971, the FA Cup victory in 1972, and finally the legendary 1974 title-winning campaign. Leeds went on an astonishing 29-game unbeaten run, crushing their rivals with precision and power. And in recognition of his sheer brilliance, Hunter became the first ever recipient of the PFA Players Player of the Year award. This was the peak of Norman Hunter, a defender feared, respected and revered in equal measure. A player whose name alone sent a message: cross this line and you'll pay the price. But football has a cruel way of shifting fortunes. Leeds' dominance wouldn't last forever, and for Hunter, the challenges ahead would test him in ways even he hadn't foreseen. For over a decade, Norman Hunter had been the immovable force behind Leeds United's golden era. But football is unforgiving. Even legends are not immune to the turning tides of fate. What had been an era of dominance was now giving way to controversy, heartbreak, and an inevitable decline. The first crack appeared on an autumn night in October 1973, in a match that would haunt English football for generations. It was a World Cup qualifier, England versus Poland at Wembley. The stakes? A ticket to the 1974 World Cup. England were overwhelming favourites, but on that night they encountered a goalkeeper who seemed almost supernatural, Jan Tomaszewski, later dubbed the man who stopped England. England relentlessly attacked, but Poland defended as if their lives depended on it. Then came the moment that changed everything. A rare Polish counterattack, a desperate chase, and in an instant, Hunter lunged in and missed. The ball broke free to Jan Tomaszewski, who fired past Peter Shilton, 1-0 to Poland. The stadium fell silent. England fought back to equalise, but it wasn't enough. For the first time since 1958, England had failed to qualify for a World Cup, and Hunter, the iron-willed enforcer, found himself under siege by the press and fans. One mistake, one mistimed tackle, had become a national tragedy. But if that night in Wembley had dented his aura, what followed in 1975 became an infamous chapter in English football history. A First Division clash between Leeds and Derby County, and a moment that would be replayed for years to come. Francis Lee, Derby's sharp and fiery forward, was known for his relentless competitiveness. But against Hunter, competitiveness turned into something far more personal. The match was tense, tackles flew in hard, and then, in a flash of fury, fists were thrown. Hunter and Lee, two warriors of the old game, engaged in an all-out brawl in front of a stunned crowd. Lee landed the first blow. Hunter responded with a punch that sent his opponent stumbling. It wasn't just a fight, it was a spectacle. The referee had no choice but to send both men off. It was one of the most infamous fistfights ever seen on an English football pitch. By this time, Leeds themselves were facing decline. Their greatest days were behind them. The 1975 European Cup final against Bayern Munich was supposed to be their crowning moment, a chance to conquer Europe and etch their name among the immortals. But fate had other plans. Despite dominating the game, Leeds fell victim to what many still call one of the worst refereeing performances in European football history. Controversial decisions robbed them of goals, and Bayern Munich seized their opportunity. Leeds lost 2-0, and with it, the dream of European glory was gone. By 1976, Hunter had played 540 matches for Leeds, but even warriors must know when to walk away. That year, he bid farewell to the club that had defined his career, moving to Bristol City and later Barnsley. The enforcer had left Elland Road, but his legacy, his tackles, his battles, his fire, would never fade. Yet his story was far from over. When Norman Hunter left Leeds United in 1976, he wasn't just leaving a club, he was leaving behind a dynasty he had helped build. But even as he moved on, his warrior's spirit remained unshaken. Football was all he had ever known, and the fire within him still burned. At Bristol City, he brought the same grit that had defined him for over a decade, playing a crucial role in keeping them in the First Division. Yet by 1979, time had begun to take its toll. His final playing days came at Barnsley, where at 37, he transitioned into a player coach role. The enforcer was evolving, not just as a competitor, but as a leader. But management was a different battlefield, one where brute force and fearless tackles meant little. His first real test came at Barnsley, where he defied expectations by leading them to promotion in 1981. It was a promising start, but the success was fleeting. A move to Rotherham United followed, but by 1985, Hunter had stepped away from management. The fire was there, but the game had changed. And perhaps so had he. Even though the dugout didn't offer the glory he once knew, Hunter remained tied to football, returning to Leeds United as a coach and later a matchday analyst. The fans never forgot him, and he never forgot them. For years, his presence in the stands, his insight into the game, and his undying passion made him more than just a former player. He was the living embodiment of Leeds United's golden era. But life had one final challenge in store. In 2013, Hunter was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. The same body that had endured decades of relentless battles on the pitch was now fighting a silent war within. Yet, true to his nature, he didn't complain. He carried on, engaging with fans, attending events, and standing as a symbol of Leeds United's unbreakable spirit. Then, in April 2020, the world changed. A silent enemy, one that no amount of strength or resilience could fight, COVID-19. Hunter tested positive and was admitted to the hospital. And just like that, the warrior who had spent his life conquering battles was now fighting alone, away from the roar of Elland Road, away from the game that had defined him. On April 17th, 2020, Norman Hunter passed away at the age of 76. Football had lost one of its fiercest warriors. Leeds had lost a legend, and the world had lost a symbol of unyielding determination. But true legends never fade. Their stories live on. Legends don't fade. They leave a mark, some in the form of goals, others in trophies. Norman Hunter left his in the form of battle scars, on himself, on his opponents, and on the history of football itself. He wasn't just a footballer, he was a warrior forged in the golden age of the game, a man who built his reputation not on words, but on fearless tackles and unwavering loyalty. For Leeds United, he was their enforcer, their shield, their heartbeat. For England, a World Cup winner. And for football, a symbol of an era where courage mattered more than fame. His passing wasn't just the end of a life. It was the closing chapter of a time when football was at its rawest, when men played not for the cameras, but for the crest on their chests. But warriors never truly die. Their battles are retold, their spirit carried forward. And every time Leeds United takes the pitch, every time a defender puts his body on the line for the team, a part of Norman Hunter lives on. Because some names don't just belong to history, they belong to eternity. If you want more deep dives into football's greatest legends and untold stories, subscribe now and be part of preserving the history of the beautiful game.